Before they built their own economy, before they built their own bank, before their own factories, their own social council, there was a priest, a school, and a town still recovering from a dictatorship. When José María Arizmendiarrieta arrived in Mondragon in 1941, the town was isolated and neglected. There were no transport links, the roads in and out were in poor condition, an earlier railway project had been abandoned. Spain was still under Franco's dictatorship and Mondragon was feeling the pressure. This was known as the Hunger Period. Working class people were living in overcrowded housing with high unemployment, with widespread tuberculosis and almost no political freedom. Many saw themselves as a defeated population, a community under occupation with no hope of change. It's important to say that Arizmendi didn't arrive as a charismatic, revolutionary leader. He was a young priest, one of many, sent out to serve the region after the war. People found his speaking style quite dull, and it didn't help that he was replacing the shoes of a priest who was quite a well-respected and adored figure within the community. But he stayed and he watched and he listened. And over time, he started sharing a vision. In his sermons and in his newspaper column, he stressed that work wasn't a punishment, it's a means of self-realization. He talked about the idea that labor deserved dignity and that people should organize for the common good. He also talked about technical education and the importance of cooperation, not just as a spiritual idea, but as a practical path forward. His first major effort came when he was invited to deliver religious instruction to young workers in the apprenticeship scheme at Union Cerrajera, the town's biggest employer. Instead of simply accepting the role, he pushed to expand the program to include young people from across the community, not just those with connections to the company. When management said no, he took matters into his own hands and started building his own independent alternative. My kind of guy. He brought together parents, he spoke to local businesses, he raised money through community events and local donations. And then he did something rare and kind of risky for someone living under a dictatorship in that era. He asked the public to pledge their support. Boxes were placed on street corners where people could write down their names and how they'd be willing to help, whether it's with money, time, or services. Around 600 residents added their names. That's about 15% of Mondragon's population at the time. Their pledges funded the school and it gave them voting rights. The school would be built on community ownership long before the first co-op of the Mondragon that we know today even existed. But believe me, this wasn't an easy or obvious path. At the time, national subsidies were unavailable and many kinds of organisations were still banned. So Arizmendi had to dig through old statutes to find a legal loophole. Eventually, he found a 19th century law that allowed the group to register under the name the League for Education and Culture. This is really creative, but it also shows how careful he was. Arizmendi was always operating within legal limits. He resisted calls to push harder even when militant Basque nationalists accused him of being too passive. But he wasn't passive at all, he was just being strategic. His supervising priests even warned him to tone things down because the government might see this grassroots organising as a threat. Obviously, under a dictatorship, even setting up a school could look like an act of rebellion, especially when you're introducing democracy into that structure. Despite this, the school did open in 1943 with 20 students. It grew every year, adding new levels and eventually offering full technical qualifications. The school focused on industrial skills and craft skills designed to meet the needs of local enterprise. In academic terms, the training was roughly the equivalent of the first 3 years of a US undergraduate degree. The school became a training ground for future co-op members and leaders. So the school wasn't just about education, it was the institutional base from which the entire cooperative ecosystem would eventually grow. It would embed values of solidarity, technical competence, and collective ownership into the next generation through practice. And by 1948, the League had 4 kinds of membership. Firstly, anyone who wanted to join. Active members, these were people who paid dues or contributed services. Sponsors, these were people who donated a minimum of 1,000 pesetas per year. And honorary members, including legally required local officials. Each group elected 10 representatives to a General Assembly. That body then elected a 14-member school board, which included 6 enterprise representatives and the mayor. This created a governance structure based on community participation, financial transparency, and shared control. Yes, this was about education, but this was also an experiment in democratic ownership built quietly under a dictatorship. And it worked. The Escuela Politécnica Profesional trained workers and essentially laid the foundation for an entire movement. The school would go on to provide the people, the skills, and the shared values that helped to launch the first cooperatives of the Mondragon network. And in the next video, we'll analyze exactly how they did that. Follow for more.